Hey, Sally.
Hey, Nick.
Do you ever get deja vu?
Yes.
Because I have the strangest feeling that you and I recorded this whole episode already. Isn't that weird?
It is weird. It's kind of like a horror movie,
It is like
honestly.
a horror movie, because I would swear we did it. It feels like almost like there was some horrible technological problem that means we have to do it all over again. So
But that
it's
never happened, so
just
it could
eerie.
possibly be that.
It's just an eerie scenario. Thanks for tuning into Howe's Things, a podcast and radio show from the David A. Howe Public Library, recorded right here in Wellsville, New York. I'm Nick Gunning, and I am joined by the reigning queen of Halloween and the director of the Fred and Harriet Taylor Memorial Library in Hammondsport, Sally Jacoby Murphy. Hey, Sally, what's up?
Not much. I'm here. I'm excited. What is this, year 7? Is that what we're on?
Halloween Now 7. Yeah, and I'm just so happy that I was at the birth of your reign as the Queen of Halloween because I feel like it was just an off-the-cuff comment in Halloween Now 2 where we declared you the Queen of Halloween. And now, just like Alexander the Great before you, your queendom has grown to not only include the All the Books show, but now House Things, plus This Endorian Life, and the Previously on X-Men podcast. That's 4 different podcasts in which you are the Queen of Halloween.
Yeah, which, I mean, I'm not sure I deserve such an honor, but I'm sure happy that I have it.
I think you do deserve it. I think you're being modest.
So thanks.
All right, well,
How many podcasts did Alexander the Great do?
not enough. Certainly not enough. We know that for sure.
I just really want to beat him. That's the point.
I think that's good. Things didn't end so great for Alexander the Great. Just be aware of that. But otherwise, yeah, lofty goals. Today, Sally and I are going to be talking about Shirley Jackson's novel, The Haunting of Hill House. It's the Library Book Club selection here for October at the David A. Howe. So we're looking forward to discussing that later in the week. But Sally and I are going to dig into it all today. But before we do that, let's open our spooky Halloween books and see where our bookmarks are at. All right, hit me, Sally. What do you got? What do you got spooky reading?
Well, I don't have enough spooky reading, to be honest. But I did obviously read The Haunting of Hill House, which I quite enjoyed, but we'll talk about more later. I did, however, for Previously on X, read a spooky X-Men comic. It's an X-Men Dracula crossover, and I don't read a lot of comic books, so this was sort of a new or a not oft traversed path for me, and I loved it. It was super great. So that was enjoyable. And then other than that, so not super spooky, but I'm reading I'm Not Dying With You Tonight, which is a YA book. I just finished the book Unorthodox, and I'm about to start A Long Petal of the Sea. So that's where my bookmark's at.
Did you say A Long Petal of the Sea?
Yeah.
Okay. What does that mean?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I haven't started it yet.
That's part of the mystery. Okay. Well, in non-Halloween reading, I finished a historical fiction called Radar Girls, and this was one that I picked up basically because of the cover. I had read one a couple months back that was called Exile Music, that was also a historical fiction and seemed sort of in the same vein. And so I was kind of expecting a little bit of like historical fiction light, which I do enjoy sometimes. And this was set during World War II. It was set in Hawaii when women were kind of drafted into the service following the events of Pearl Harbor. So I was excited to read that. Not really what the book was, though. The book was, I don't even know, because it didn't feel even like slice of life Hawaii in the 40s. It was just kind of, I don't know. I just wasn't very good. I don't know. It wasn't good historical fiction, and I didn't really find the characters all that interesting. There's a romance that kind of, like romance and family secrets is maybe a little bit more of the focus, that I don't really even think it nailed those. So I wish I could recommend it, but I can't. Exile Music, though, great. I do recommend that. Wonder Woman is celebrating her 80th anniversary. Are you a Wonder Woman fan, Sally?
I mean, I'm not sure I could call myself a fan, but I appreciate Wonder Woman.
Okay. Well, I read a collection of digital first issues. So the DC app, DC Infinite, I think is what it's called now, they've started doing these that are only on the app, and then they later would kind of collect them into trade paperbacks. So this is the first collection of that, though I read them digitally. It's called Wonder Woman Agent of Peace. And it was okay. It was a mixed bag. This is like really standalone Wonder Woman stories. It's not like heavy, dense continuity kind of stuff. It's just like, here's what Wonder Woman's doing today. And normally I would like that, but this ended up being more of like a team up book. And it's hard to team up someone with Wonder Woman because she's like a god. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Like I'm not the target audience, I guess, for like, what if Wonder Woman and Harley Quinn hung out? I don't care is the answer. Like, I don't think Wonder Woman would have a good time, and I didn't either. So that's what I read for that.
Yeah.
Spooky reading. So as you'll remember, do you remember Eric Mickles? Do you remember him? He was real tall, kind of lanky.
Oh, well, yeah.
Does that sound familiar? Okay. He'd be like, I hate Stephen King. He writes so long.
Sort
like
of.
That kind of stuff. Okay. Anyway.
Okay, yeah.
Eric and I have been reading a Halloween book together every year for like, I feel like 10 years now, a long time, before we even started doing the All the Book show. Yeah. And it was his pick this year, and he chose one called Cycle of the Werewolf, which is not a really well-known Stephen King. And I feel like the movie adaptation, which is called Silver Bullet, is a little bit more, like, people are aware of that. But Cycle of the Werewolf is a novella that takes you like January through December as these werewolf attacks sort of increase, and then like the werewolves, it keeps going. So by the end, everything's kind of coalesced into one. They start as sort of individual incidents and gradually just get a little bit more layered and a bit more connected. I thought it was really effective. Like, Eric and I agreed that it was like, it has a job to do and it does it. You know what I mean? It's not chocked full of stuff you don't care about, as we learned Christine was last year. It's like, get to the point. This werewolf is harassing this town. And it builds to a good conclusion. It's all very believable, and you're just sort of like in and out, one and done. And it was pretty cool. I
mean, that does sound interesting. I think I've said this before, but definitely Christine would have been better had it been a novella. So yeah. Stephen King is good at that kind of thing.
The one weird thing about this was that it was illustrated. And while some of the illustrations were kind of mixed in, there was illustrated plates that were full color. But those fell in really unfortunate places because I think every time one of those happened, it would kind of depict the werewolf attack. But you'd get that page with the illustration on it before that part of the story hit.
Oh.
And it was just like, why would you do that? Like, if you're going to choose one or the other, choose after, because you're just spoiling the story.
Yeah, that's a bummer.
It was really bizarre. And I was reading an original print, and Eric's was like a 2018 or something. So it's like, you had 40 years to figure this out.
But no, they were focused on other things.
Just do it. So anyway, that was our joint Stephen King, and it was pretty good.
Nice.
Not deep. It's not a super deep, like character study like The Shining or something like that. But it is just like crisp, quick Halloween fun. So check it out. I also read Archie's Halloween Blowout: Rise of the Monsters. As you know, Sally, my Archie fandom goes way back, and Archie Halloween is also a long-standing tradition I have.
Yes, which I did not realize that Archie like yearly had a Halloween episode.
They do. They have like they have digests that are specifically like packed with Halloween stories. They have these special like digital only collections that do Archie stories like throughout the ages, that cover different Halloween things. But there's also a pretty strong Archie horror subgenre. So there's like Afterlife of Archie, which is like a zombie thing. There's Jughead the Hunger. Somehow it's Veronica and Vampire Dracula. I can't remember what it's called, but it's that I don't know. But there's a Veronica vampire one too. So Archie horror is its own thing, Sally. So maybe some year we can do that instead of.
I'd be totally down.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. I did want to say, this is going back to The Shining, but I heard a fun new theory today. So there's like all these theories on The Shining, right? Both on Stephen King's version of The Shining and then the adaptation that Kubrick did for the big screen.
Yeah.
And there's all these like theories as to why this happens and like why the hotel sort of turns on them and like all this stuff. But I heard a new one today, and it is that while it appears that we are sort of this outside looking in view, we're actually experiencing the entire Shining through the eyes of Wendy. And so she is slowly going crazy. So it's not actually Jack Nicholson's character, or what's his name? Is his name Jack? Yeah.
Jack Torrance in the book.
Yeah, he's not the one who's actually descending into madness. It's actually her. And so the more she tries to convince herself that like he's the one going crazy, the more things spiral out of her control. Which explains why a lot of the weird things that happen tend to happen to Wendy. She's the one that sees the twins for the first time in the book. There's a long wormhole of YouTube videos you can go down and explore this theory. But I always think Shining theories are kind of fun because they can go anywhere.
Yeah, I'm sure you've seen that documentary, right?
Yes.
That is a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's very convincing too, that documentary.
It is. And what is that called? Room 237 or something like that?
Yeah, Room something.
Yeah, whatever it is in the movie versus book, I always confuse them. But yeah, I watched that and I started being like, this is stupid. And then like the more I got in, I was kind of like, there is a lot of imagery that does imply that now that you say it. So it's an interesting watch. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm winding down my Halloween reading with a vintage comic book collection called Showcase Presents The Phantom Stranger. So the Phantom Stranger is kind of a mystical character from vintage DC, and it's more like an anthology. It's standalone, sort of spooky, sometimes Twilight Zone-esque stories that the Phantom Stranger is kind of almost like the Watcher. Like he does participate sometimes. Like he does actually affect things that are going on, but it's more like the Phantom Stranger is there to observe, and occasionally he'll intervene. So it's really cool. It's just like kooky vintage comic stuff, not unlike your Night Screams X-Men that you just watched. So I'm doing that. I'm reading one called The Night of the Scaredy Crows with my son.
Love that.
That's he loves. Well, I think you've read Wolf Boy by Art Baltazar and Franco. You've read those comics like back in the day. Yeah, same guys. Same guys who did this Night of the Scaredy Crows. But other than that, Sally, I'm climbing my own personal Everest, which is Dune by Frank Herbert. And I
am stoked.
I'm rounding third. I'm rounding third on this, Sally. And it's only because I feel that I've made a commitment to your wife. I must continue because she first borrowed my copy, and then I was like, well, if you're going to read it, I'll read it. And I've doomed myself to reading Doom.
You've doomed yourself to Doom.
Doomed to Dune. Yeah, there it is. And that's become a weirdly big thing in our household.
Yeah. You let her borrow those original, very cool copies of Doom. And she got obsessed with it. And she is not, I should caveat this with, she is not a big sci-fi person.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, Dune has done it for her. And she has been walking around the house being like, the Cuisinarch's Hatterack. Things I don't understand.
Oh, yeah. So I mean, Sarah's going to be on. Sarah's never been on the podcast before. Sally's wife, Sally Jacoby Murphy, is going to be on the podcast in the next episode, and we're going to be talking all about Doom. And I'm excited because, like, maybe you're not aware of this, but Sarah's brilliant, for one. And she and I always have a good time talking about books. So I'm really interested to see her take on Dune because it is so weird. It's like a book that doesn't want you to read it, you know? So it's a strange situation. But anyway, that's my bookmark this time around. Let's talk a little bit about Halloween viewing.
Yes.
So give me a couple of your greatest hits here for 2021.
Oh golly. Okay. Well, I had a real focus on foreign horror this year.
Okay.
Which is largely because a lot of our streaming platforms have embraced foreign horror for the first time. I'm really excited about. I feel like Netflix just finally discovered that if they put the best from like whatever blockbusters are coming out in all these other countries, that like we'll also watch it. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that Squid Games is on that list and is phenomenal.
Yeah.
So like if you haven't heard of Squid Games, I don't know how to help you. But it's a Korean series. It's about 10 episodes long, and it's sort of a futuristic a la Hunger Games kind of situation, but it's set now in like the world we exist in. And it's great. It's really well cast and well made. It's really interesting and fun, but it is super bloody. So note that.
Okay.
Other ones, though, I watched one called Cadaver, which is a Norwegian horror film.
Oh, no thanks. I've read some Norwegian thrillers, and that alone, it's like they're so dark. I mean, I'm
They
sure
are.
not everything to come out of Norway is dark, but that when you look at like, specifically that sort of thing, I feel like it does tend to have a darker twist.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I feel like these are people that exist half their lives in literal darkness. Plus like they're Scandinavian and I think like they're just cold all the time. They live in these like obscure rocky areas. I don't know. I mean, we have this sort of like assumption about even Minnesota and stuff, where a lot of Norwegians settled. So I feel like there's something to the fact that Scandinavians are indeed dark.
Okay.
It's like Germans are sort of like dark, but all in a different way. I don't know. But anyway, so Cadaver is about a family. They're starving, and they go to this mansion for this party. And they all wear these masks, and then like horror unfolds. And I found it really interesting. So. But yeah, I mean, I've been watching a lot of these foreign horror films. I've also been noticing that Zoom horror is a big deal these days.
Sure, yeah.
There were a few of these in the last 10 years that were popular, like the movie Unfriended, or the movie Searching.
Yeah, Eric and I saw Searching in theaters when we were at some conference or something. We were like, oh, hey, let's go watch Searching. And it was pretty good. We also saw Dr. Sleep at a conference, which I know you still have not done your due diligence in watching. But
Anyway, I'm very sorry.
This is my annual plea where I tell you to watch Dr. Sleep.
Yes. Okay. I'll write it down.
Okay.
So this year, a movie called Host came out, and that one, there's a bunch of scientists that get together and they try to declare what the scariest movie is by getting a bunch of people and putting heart monitors on them and like rating their pulse while they watch them.
Okay.
And there's a lot of debate around this because it doesn't always come up with what horror fans think is actually the scariest movie.
Okay.
But this year, so Sinister had been, the 2012 film, had been the reigning champion, which I actually agree with. I think Sinister is terrifying, but Host replaced it, and I disagree with that. So I downloaded the app Shudder for the first time, which is my new obsession.
And let me just say, it shocks me that you've never had the app Shudder. I mean, how are you not like on the splash page of those, being like, "Hi, I'm Sally Jacoby Murphy. This is my world."
I was a little misled, I feel like, because I kept seeing the advertisements for Shudder, and it just looked to me like a bunch of art students' senior projects on like a page. And I was like, I don't really want to watch that. I mean, I'm all for like homegrown horror, but not if it comes at the cost of me wasting hours and hours watching these like art house films.
Yeah.
So, but I finally downloaded it, and I watched Host, and it is enjoyable. It is worth a watch. It is creepy, but it is not the scariest movie of all time. So. Yeah.
Okay.
And lastly, I will leave you with, I watched this movie right after we recorded last year. I'm thinking of ending things, and I think about it.
Oh yeah.
Once a
with Jesse Plemons, right? Where a couple goes to like visit his parents. Yeah, that is a mind-bending movie.
Yep. And it's ambiguously classified as horror because it's not, gory or anything like that. But it is surreal, and it is freaky and weird.
It's
and
upsetting. I think it's upsetting. Yeah.
Upsetting. But I think about it constantly. And so if you haven't seen that yet, you should see it, and then you should contact me and we should talk about it.
Okay. All right. I think that's a great plan. Mine dwarfs in comparison to yours, and I really haven't watched anything that I would highly recommend. We watched this movie called The Innkeepers, which is on Peacock. And the premise was cool, and actually most of the movie was really entertaining. It was about these two who work at a creepy old inn that's like getting ready to get closed down forever. And so they've already closed most of the floors and stuff, and it's just like they're trying to prove there's ghosts before they close it down. And so there's a lot of like, I don't know, there's genuinely scary moments, but when you really get down to it, they show too much, and you just can't come back from it. It's just...
It's a big problem.
Like, as soon as you see what the big thing is about, like, my wife and I both just, like, laughed out loud because it's just goofy. It was like SNL, So it didn't really work. It's too bad because so much of the movie we were really enjoying. I watched The Legend of Hellhouse, which often gets compared, I don't think favorably, to The Haunting of Hill House. This is based on a Richard Matheson story, and it is about people who go to investigate, like supernatural investigators go to this haunted house and try to get to the bottom of what's going on. That's another one that, like, you're in suspense. It's not really scary, but it's really intriguing and interesting. And you get to the end, and there's just like a big summation, like, this is what's going on, this is why, and you're just like, shut up. Like, you've just ruined this movie by talking about this so much. So it was one we kind of walked away from, and we're like, meh. But then, TV series wise, so we've been trying to get back into the show Angel, spin-off of Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Oh, yeah.
We were watching that pretty regularly, and then we just like stopped. And so I was like, hey, let's try Angel again. So we picked it right back up, and it's fun. I don't know how long we'll go this time, but I do enjoy it. So we're watching that, and we just started the Shining miniseries with Steven Weber, the one that is like written by, like, Stephen King wrote the teleplay, and it's supposed to be a more faithful adaptation of the book. Off to an okay start. We haven't really gotten any of the scares yet. It's all just kind of set up, but I feel like it mimics Kubrick's style a little too much, and you're just like, don't do this on network television. Like, don't try to.
Yeah.
It's a weird move. So I'm intrigued in some of the choices that are making, and I'm looking forward to finishing it, but I'm nervous that it's going to suck. That it's going to suck.
Understandable.
Yeah.
I will say, as far as like series is concerned, I gave American Horror Stories. So there's American Horror Story that's been going on for like 12 years now. But the same folks, Ryan Murphy and that crew, have done more like a individual episode.
Oh.
It's more a la Black Mirror or something like that.
Okay.
And it's actually pretty decent. So if folks are a fan of American Horror Stories or Black Mirror or anything like that, it's worth a shot. I think Ryan Murphy has lost a lot of trust, but go back to it just for this.
Okay, all right. Well, let's transition into some book news here.
Look into the future to see what it proves. It's time for book news.
I thought we would take a look at some scary horror books coming out in 2021 in case you really want to get freaked out. So we're going to be looking at an article that was originally posted on culturedvultures.com. This is by Nat Wassel, and the article is called 10 New Horror Books to Scare Your Pants Off in 2021. So I'm going to get it rolling with In Darkness, Shadows Breathe by Catherine Cavendish, came out back in January. This says, Nessa and Carol, two women from the same town, are thrown together by their proximity to the old asylum. Okay, problem number one. You don't want to be in close proximity to an old asylum. And the women who seems to be haunting them both, Lydia Warren Carmody. The line between reality and dreams will be blurred, and it's a battle for their very own bodies. Ugh.
I mean, I love a good asylum story, so I'm all for it.
I'm sure, yeah.
Number 2, The Children God Forgot by Graham Masterson. A young woman births a monster. An engineer fleeing a dark tunnel underneath London sees a group of ghostly children. 2 police officers are confronted with the dead coming back to life in the sewers of London. If you agree with me that scary kids are the worst part of any horror, you might love or hate this book in equal measure.
How do you feel about scary kids in horror?
I feel neutral about scary kids in horror.
Neutral.
Truly.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Sometimes they're great, sometimes they're not, but they don't in their inherence freak me out, so.
Okay, got it. Number 3, Tainted Love, a Women in Horror anthology.
Yes.
Let's see. You're on board? Okay.
Yes.
The anthology contains 14 stories, which explores the ways in which love can go wrong and the wounds it can leave. Some of the highlighted stories include one of an artist who discovers too late the danger of painting her muse, or a boy finding out how deadly a birthday wish can be. If you're new to horror, you might enjoy dipping in and out of this anthology. Again, that's from
100%.
culturedvultures.com.
Excellent. 4, A Broken Darkness by Premi Mohammed. Nick Prasad is putting his life back together after the anomaly, when the things from beyond tried to force their way into our world. Ooh, interesting.
That just based on that alone sounds a little Stranger Things-esque.
That's true. Yeah, a little bit like parallel universe-y darkness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Number 5, Whispers Down the Lane by Clay McLeod Chapman. Let's see. Richard is a man without a past, newly married and teaching art at an elementary school when a murdered rabbit. Can you murder a rabbit? I mean, you can kill a rabbit. Can you murder it? Is my question.
That's a really profound question. I mean, if I feel like you and I are both vegetarians now, Nick. I
True.
think we would say you could murder.
Okay. All right. I guess just an interesting verb choice, but you're right. Point taken. Anyway, a murdered rabbit is found on the school grounds with a birthday card for Richard attached. Yowzer. 30 years after a boy named Sean told a lie about a favorite teacher, someone is here to make sure that those lies are punished. Knowing the inspiration, this is bound to be a profoundly psychological type of horror. Yeesh. This is based on the McMartin preschool trials. That's the reference there. I don't know anything about that, and I don't care to.
No. Interesting. I would say I don't care to, but I'm totally going to Google that.
I know you are. I know. I can't believe you're still doing this episode. I thought for sure you'd be Googling it.
Number 6, The Drowning Kind, Jennifer McMahon. As she is going through Lexi's things, Jack finds that she was researching the family and the history of the estate, which has a very dark history indeed.
Did you see here up in the description of this book, it says McMahon is the New York Times bestselling author who's been compared very favorably to Shirley Jackson with her twisty and haunting tales. So there you go. Relevant. Number 7, The Mary Shelley Club by Goldie Moldavsky. Rachel Chavez loves horror films because the rules are clear. Don't go to abandoned buildings. Don't split up. Don't make out with anyone when there's a murderer around. Then Rachel's recruited to the Mary Shelley Club, a group of kids who play pranks and put people through fear tests. That sounds like a classic horror trope, doesn't it?
It does. I actually just watched a movie called Monster Party, where it's about a group of people who are recovering murderers.
Recovering?
Yes. So they were a club that murdered people, and then they're in, like, rehab for it. But then, obviously, I'm going to, spoiler alert, rehab doesn't work.
I wouldn't assume it did, no.
But that reminds me of it. Number 8, Survive the Night by Riley Sager. Charlie, a film-mad college student, is in the car with a guy from her school who is looking for a companion for the drive back to Ohio. As the drive progresses, Charlie begins to feel suspicious of Josh. His story about going home to look after his sick dad doesn't quite add up.
Riley Sager is, I wouldn't consider him to be a horror novelist, but maybe that's the direction he's going. I know Eric this year was reading Final Girls, and he seemed to enjoy that one pretty well. And I read one, and I cannot remember, maybe it was Final Girls even that I read, I don't know. I read one about, like, girls at a camp and lies and stuff, and it was more psychological thriller than horror. So, but maybe this one sounds a little bit more murdery. So, Number 9, Tide Pool by Nicole Wilson. Let's see. In 1913, Sorrow Hamilton heads to Tide Pool, the last known place her missing brother visited. I mean, with a name like Sorrow, you know what I mean? You're kind of dooming. Yeah. It's like you name your kid Jeeves. He's probably going to be a butler. There's few paths. You know what I'm saying? It's just like. Yeah. Anyway, I blame the parents. The residents of the town can't give her an answer when she asks about her brother, and the corpse is washed up on the beach, convince Sorrow to get out of town and send in the professionals. But then she knows the town's deadly secret, and the residents are not inclined to let her leave. Okay, take us home, Sally.
All right, number 10, My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones. Jade is watching the gentrification of her rural town with some trepidation when things take a turn. And she feels as though she is in one of the slasher films that she likes so much. The town is heading towards catastrophe. There's tension between the residents of the town and the outsiders as tourists go missing in true slasher style.
This is one of my major pet peeves in anything. Books, movies, TV, whatever. When people are like, this is just like and then insert the kind of media that they're in. I hate that. When people are like, well, it's not like this is some dumb horror novel. I hate that. So.
It's true. You're right, because I do hate it in any horror movie when they're like, in the horror movie, we wouldn't go down here. And it's like, well, but you are.
Yeah.
Shut up.
Yeah, sweetheart, we know. Which one of these, Sally, if any, are the ones that, what spoke to you here?
Like, what would be my favorite? Probably the horror anthology.
Oh, okay.
First of all, I love talking women in horror because I think, truly, I believe that is why I got into horror in the first place, is because that's where the good protagonists were for women. Mm-hmm. And my dad got me a book a few years back called Women in Chainsaws, and that's all about the psychology of women in horror.
Yeah.
So this sounds like my thing.
Mm-hmm.
How about you?
Tide Pool. I liked this. I liked the penultimate one here about Sorrow Hamilton. I don't know. Something about that just intrigued me. Like, she knows the secret. They don't want her to leave. Bodies washing up on the shore. I liked it.
That's fair.
Maybe I'm going to track it down.
Have you watched Midnight Mass yet?
No. I mean, I feel like I've seen all the other Mike Flanagan stuff. Dr. Sleep, Hill House, and Bly Manor. But I just couldn't quite pull the trigger on that one.
Yeah. It just reminds... It takes place on an island.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of washing up of on shore. I found it to be... It's my least favorite out of the 3 recent ones, but a lot of washing of things up on shore.
Is it? I tend to avoid scary stuff that goes for like a religious angle. Like, I don't like things that are demony, or like horror in that way. Does it go that route? Or is that Oh, it does. Okay, all right.
Yeah. It's like straight Catholic priest demon horror.
Okay, all right. So I made the right choice then.
Yeah, sounds like you did.
Okay. All right. Well, then I think it's time we get to the lady of the hour. Let's talk Shirley Jackson.
Absolutely.
Author Spotlight.
Okay, well, today Sally and I are going to be talking about The Haunting of Hill House. Haunting of Hill House is the 5th of Shirley Jackson's novels that was released. It came out in 1959. It was the first of her books that anybody cared about, the first one that was profitable. And she only wrote one more novel after this. Neil Gaiman has listed it as the scariest book he's ever read. Stephen King has talked about it quite a bit as being a major inspiration, and I think you can kind of see that a little bit in something like The Shining. But she wrote countless short stories, several children's stories, including one called Famous Sally, which I feel like you need to figure out what that is and report back.
I do. Definitely.
She also wrote 3 memoirs and attended Syracuse University.
I did not know that.
Yeah, so did
Local
Joyce.
gal.
So did Joyce Carol Oates. So it turns out some real creepers over in Syracuse. I don't know.
We do love Joyce Carol Oates.
We do. I bought her a tuna sandwich once. We don't have to get into it now.
No big deal.
Lots of adaptations here. We have a stage version, we have a radio play, 2 movie versions, and a TV version. My introduction to this story was the 1963 film, which was directed by Robert Wise. And what a career on Robert Wise. When you look at the things he did, it's like, Haunting of Hill House, The Sound of Music, The Andromeda Strain, Star Trek, the motion picture. Like, what? How do you track a career like that?
Some people are just multifaceted.
Yes. So, am I right? Is this where you first did you read the book first, or did you watch this movie first?
I watched that movie first. So this is my first time reading this book, but I saw that movie when I was like 14.
Okay.
And I fell in love with it. That was actually one of the first horror movies that I saw that I really fell in love with was The Haunting. So they dropped the Hill House in the movie. Anyone who's unaware of it. But it is a fabulous movie. In black and white, really beautifully shot, really well cast. Yeah.
It's one that it stays in the conversation. Like when you're talking about like greatest haunted house movies of all times or greatest horror movies of all time, it seems to get in there, even though, I don't know, when we get into the plot of the book, we'll talk a little bit about just what elements of horror are in there. But this has remained a classic. One thing that has not remained a classic is the 1999 version by Jan de Bont. And he directed Speed 1 and 2, so I mean, take that with a grain of salt. Twister, he directed one of the Lara Croft movies, did a lot of like cinematography and stuff. But this version, first of all, the cast is banana cakes.
Yeah.
It's Catherine Zeta-Jones, it's Owen Wilson, it's, who am I forgetting? What's his name? Liam Neeson. I don't know. I mean, Sally and I did an episode of The Sandorian Life together where we were talking about Lego Star Wars Terrifying Tales, and you mentioned this movie. You mentioned this 19 Hauntings, and you said you don't say this very much, but this movie is garbage. Would you care to expound on that, Sally?
I mean, I do just think it's garbage. The graphics in it are just awful. I mean, It's everything that's wrong with like late 90s, early 2000s, like bad graphics. They choose the absolute wrong things to focus
Oh
on.
yeah. Oh
So
yeah.
all the characters have lost all their subtlety and they're
Mm-hmm.
just like these extreme nonsense versions of themselves.
Yeah.
They try to go for like the cheap scares, so they like replace a lot of the subtlety with these like weird ghostly figures and stuff. It's terrible.
There is one jump scare with the fireplace. You know the part I'm talking about?
Yes, I do.
There's a jump scare where they're like digging around in some ash. That was the one place where I was like, "Gah!" And the rest of the time I was just like, "Oh my gosh, okay, we get it. You figured out how to do mediocre computer animation."
Yep. Yep.
It's like it's not scary at all. And
No.
like the characters, I like all of those actors. All of those actors
Oh, yeah.
individually are great. But they're all headliners and you put them in a ensemble movie and it's like I guess the actress who plays Eleanor, I mean she still kind of remains the focal point, but she's also like the least dynamic in there.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like it's a very uneven movie, I think, because of that. And it
Yeah.
really just kind of fails on all levels, in my opinion.
No, I agree. Well, and I remember like so Theodore has always been my favorite character.
Yeah.
And I like Catherine Zeta-Jones, I really do, but like the version she plays of this character is the
Right.
most like sexed up version you
Right.
could possibly imagine. And it takes like all of the interesting like subtleties of the character
Yeah.
and just obliterates them.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's garbage. It's garbage.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I don't have anything positive to say about that. And then finally, there was the Netflix show by Mike Flanagan,
Yes.
and I did like that. I don't know again that they nailed the ending there, but I was really invested in that show,
Yeah.
and then
My
that was genuinely scary to me, like as it went along.
I agree. Well, so I watched that and I really enjoyed it. And then my wife and I watched it together and we got into a long argument about the ending
Mm,
because I don't love it. Like, I
yeah,
don't think it's as good as the original, but I didn't hate it and she hated it. Like, she,
I just think it doesn't hold water. There's a lot of
yeah.
questions about like, so then who is the villain and what was the purpose for all that? So I mean, I don't want to give it away, but I
Hmm.
maybe I would side with Sarah on that because
You probably would.
I just don't I don't know.
Yeah.
The 90s one was the last one I saw. So that was the only one that I
Mhm.
watched after having read the book.
Mm.
And it's not a good comparison. But well, what did you think of the book? What did you think of the book? Being familiar with the story, like how did you like reading it?
Oh, I loved it. It's sort of surprising that I haven't read it up until this
It
point,
is,
being
yeah.
a fan of the movie for so long. But I guess I always was afraid this was one of those weird instances where I was like, what if the book isn't as good as the movie?
Yeah.
But it is, like, it is. So, what I think is kind of interesting is the book's characters. You see the Netflix adaptation, the one that's not really the same story, but
Right.
they've taken pieces of it. That you see reflected in here through the psychology of the characters, I feel like, because
Mhm.
there's more time in that
Mhm.
show to sort of unfold them a little bit. But then the story is very similar and just as beautifully told. And I just think her writing is fabulous. Like,
Yeah.
I love her sentence structure, the way she pieces things together. I like the subtlety of it.
Mhm.
I think it's great. What do you think?
Well, so I had kind of an interesting experience reading it because I had seen the original movie and I'd seen the Netflix one as well. And so I knew the beats of the story pretty well. And so in some ways I was a little like bored is not the right word because it is a good book and it's well done and you can clearly see all the things that were inspired by it and the way that it kind of changed the genre. But sometimes I think it can be kind of hard to go backwards in that sort of thing. We were talking just here in the library. We were talking a little bit about To Kill a Mockingbird, and that was another one where I have read and watched so many things that took a lot of inspiration from To Kill a Mockingbird. When I watched the progenitor, when I watched the original, or read it in that case, I felt a little like, yeah, okay, but I've read this a million times, you know. And I felt a little bit of that with The Haunting of Hill House. I felt like I know where this is going. I get what she's doing. And I think had I read that first or like read that before I had experienced things that take a lot of beats from it, I think I would have liked it a lot more. But here I was more in the position appreciating it for its place in history and the way in which it's written, but not so much being caught up in the characters and the scare of it. Like, it's really hard for me to say whether or not the book is scary. Does that make sense?
Mhm. No, it does make sense. It's interesting that those are your two examples, like To Kill a Mockingbird and this, because I do think that those are both examples of really well-made film adaptations of those books.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, I mean, it's both a good thing because those are both, I mean, like To Kill a Mockingbird is a phenomenal film, but it does beg the question of, like, it is harder than to go back and read a slower version of that.
Yeah.
Like, the book is just inherently going to be, like, longer and
Yeah.
slower. So what does that do? So, no, I think that's interesting.
I think the thing that I appreciated most about it is it's incredibly simple. You know, like it is. It's not like there are big monsters or big, like, oh, and here's a big cataclysmic event that's happening. It's really, it's kind of it's a slow burn, and you can see why it gets compared to like something like Turning of the Screw, that sort of thing, because it is all about like ratcheting up this tension and like messing with your expectations and like pushing you to a place where you're just like hand wringing because you need to know like where it's going to go. And I think like it's a delicate needle to thread, and I think she objectively like just does a good job with that.
No, I agree. Well, and a lot of the like actual spooky stuff that happens is very relatable.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like you hear a noise and you feel like this is something that is unexplainable, even though you know that it probably could be explained. Or people feel things, or like Theodora feels a hand grab her hand, and I think that's such a creepy image because then there's no hand there.
Right.
But like that happens all the time to people in regular life where you're like, oh, I thought this thing happened, but maybe it's just my mind playing tricks on me.
Yeah.
So that kind of unfolding is just really well done. So
Yeah, and I think it also, I like when books sort of float an alternate theory, because there are certain things like the handhold or when they see the ghost family that like you have to sort of acknowledge, okay, something really supernatural here is happening. But I think the book makes maybe an equally strong case that this is coming from Eleanor. That like she is the one who, whatever, is manifesting these things. Like they drop hints about her childhood and a lot of the things that happened. Like having her be the thing that's bringing that out is, I think, a viable alternative to what's happening in the book. And I just like that, you know. I like that it kind of lacks a tidiness in that, you know. Like you get to the end of the book and you're not like, and here's exactly what happened, you know. It's just sort of like, that was crazy, you know, like the end. And I think that's cool. I like that a lot.
I agree. Well, and I do think the book does a really good job in that. Like the film, you understand Eleanor's character to be someone who is very fragile. But I think the book plays a little bit more into like her background and her psychology and why she might be vulnerable, either to have like a breakdown or to be vulnerable to the house's power or like this evilness that ambiguously exists in this place. We should mention, I don't know if we need to do a real plot by plot point, but
True, yes. Why don't you? You give us the broad strokes, will you?
well, the broad strokes are that there are two women who have clairvoyant abilities,
Yeah.
Eleanor and Theodora, and they have been asked by basically this fellow, he's a psychiatrist, but also like a cult supernatural interest guy, to spend the night, or well, spend like a week and a half in this place called Hill House that has a long and sordid past of people dying in it. And they're also accompanied by like the heir to the house.
Yeah.
And there are other characters that come in and out, but basically it's like the four of them.
The couple that comes later, I feel like was a good thing to delete from adaptations. It really doesn't add much.
I agree.
I can't remember their names now, but a couple comes later who are kind of interested in the same things. And I don't know if they were meant to be a red herring or just to give the characters somebody else to play off of, but it feels kind of like what was that all about?
Yeah, I agree.
Inclusion. So,
Yeah. And it seems a little over dramatic.
It does. Yeah, it does.
Yep.
I think that's the part that doesn't work so much. The creepy caretakers, I mean, that's another thing that you have with the Dudleys, and that's present in all versions of it. I mean, that's a classic trope right there, and maybe she's inventing the trope here in this very novel, but You definitely have that.
Yeah.
I feel like so in the '90s version, Catherine Zeta-Jones is just she's a gay character. I mean, she just is, and I feel like if that was the only version of that you watch, you might assume that that's not present in the novel or the earlier versions, but it definitely is, and I'm just interested in the fact that that doesn't really seem to have been a thing,
Yeah, I am too. Well, and this has long been like in the queer community sort of a like people know of it
Yeah.
because of that. Like,
Yeah.
if you're gay, especially if you grew up like pre Gen Z, you're kind of like, I know everything that has a gay character ever written or like put on screen because it happens so infrequently. And so like I definitely knew that this was like always an inherent character, but even I was a little bit surprised reading it to be like, oh yeah, like this is an obvious like wink and a nod in the 60s version, and it's still a wink and a nod in her original writing. Like she wrote this on purpose. Like this is not an interpretation. This is a queer character.
It might be enough. There might be enough doubt to sort of be like, oh no, you're just reading into that. Like maybe that's the reason why it wasn't, or maybe nobody was paying attention because it was like a horror book. I don't know. But like when you have a woman writing genre fiction, particularly horror, which I think was seen to be, and still is a little bit, seen to be kind of like a trashier thing to do. And she's writing a gay character in the 50s, like into that book is startling,
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree. I really should do more like research on it because I would be curious. I mean, like she herself, as far as I know, was not gay. Like she was married to a man. She doesn't have any like writing, as far as I know, that would like imply that she was queer at all. Obviously, it's almost impossible to like really know these things coming from our time. But I think that's also really interesting. And she's writing this in the 50s, which is like right around the lavender scare. So I just think like, what a fascinating tidbit. And like, thank you, Shirley Jackson, for writing a really like interesting portrayal of a queer person.
And I would be interested to know, like, if it wasn't intentionally to do just that, what does it serve in the story? You know what I mean? Like, there's not a reason why she had to. Like, it's not like, oh, it only works if this character is gay. It's like she did it, and it's also like not really a thing within the book. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, it's not a.
Yeah, it's not like nothing hinges on it. It's just like she wrote a human because she felt like that's what she wanted the character to be. Yeah. Which is like remarkable.
It is. It is, because it was 1959. So, yeah. I do feel like if you're a fan of, if you read horror, if you like spooky books, if you're, a Halloween reader or something, I feel like Haunting of Hill House is one that's kind of a necessity, I think, in that. If you're putting together like a classic horror library, you need to have Haunting of Hill House.
I agree. Yeah, I definitely think so. And after reading it, I'm like, yeah, I absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Sally, if somebody has watched the movie or read this book or something, and this is kind of the zone of horror that they like, where might you send them, either in book or movies or TV? Like, pick your poison, whatever you like.
Ooh, good question. I mean, so this is, like Nick has sort of said, I think this birthed a lot of like what we understand to be like classic haunting movies. So a lot of the best ones, I think, borrow a lot from this. So you could watch like any number of those, and I think you would get a lot of these vibes. But it did remind me, like Guillermo del Toro's The Orphanage feel like very much has this vibe.
Okay.
And I would say, like, the new Netflix adaptation is definitely worth watching. And it definitely still has a lot of this vibe, and the characters are really interesting. So that's worth watching. I also think, and it's a little bit, I mentioned American Horror Story earlier. I stand by the first few seasons of that being really solid. And the first season has a lot of this feeling, this question of, like, is the house the evil? Is it the history of the people haunting the house that are the problem? And I feel like Ryan Murphy definitely borrowed from this when he wrote that show, because it unfolds in a very similar way. So those are my suggestions.
Okay. All right. I'll take them.
Yeah, so I did the Fred and Harriet Taylor Memorial Library in Hammondsport, New York, has a monthly book club. Shout out to all the book club members. And I asked them, yeah, woo-hoo. I asked them if they had any favorite creepy books that they've read or that they're reading now. And these are what they gave me. So Janet said Little Fires Everywhere, which we will actually be reading soon, and is a Hulu show, which is pretty good. Bonnie said The Lottery, which Shirley Jackson short story.
There
so
you go.
that ties it perfectly. Barb and Marion said Rosemary's Baby, which I actually did not know was a book.
Oh, I think that's Ira Levin who wrote that. Because I've read some of his plays and stuff.
Yeah, I felt kind of stupid, but I didn't know that. Jareen said she loves anything Dean Koontz, and Anne said that she loves Stephen King, and Halloween wouldn't be Halloween without The Shining. So
I agree.
Classic.
I agree.
But I thought those were some great ones. So
I've got a couple here from the David A. Howe Library. It's not a competition, but I also have some
you
from
know.
my library.
yeah, it's only not a competition because you know who won.
That's true. That's true. Chris on Facebook says The Dunwich Horror by Lovecraft and the original Amityville Horror, which flies off the pages. Shiver. Joe says Ghost Story by Peter Straub. That is a weird book. That is a weird book and a weirder movie. I had a couple, both Greg and Kevin are recommending Clive Barker, which I've never read. I've never read a Clive Barker.
Me neither.
So, I don't know. We got a couple of classics here. The Thing at the Foot of the Bed, that was from TR. Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Megan says Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. So lots of good Halloween reads, and we've got a nice big display here. Do you have a display at your library?
No, but I did.
Interesting. Interesting.
Oh my gosh.
No wonder you don't want it to be a competition.
Fine.
Well, we've got lots of kooky, spooky things going on here at the David A. Howe Public Library. We're showing the Rocky Horror sequel Shock Treatment, which nobody knows about or cares about, so we're going to see if that gets some interest. So we're doing that. We've got a Halloween event that's going the day before for kids, where we're doing lantern tours of the library. We're doing the Haunting Book Club, which is later in this week. If you're one of those diligent listeners who's listening on the day of release, it's Tuesday. Tuesday is when we're doing that this week. And then we're also going to show the movie. Lots of cool things going on. And next week, we'll have Sally Jacoby Murphy on here to talk to me about Dune. So you can decide which of the Jacoby Murphys you prefer.
Oh, no. She's definitely smarter than me.
All right. Well, Sally, always a pleasure to hang out with you on Halloween in particular.
Thank you. It's
in general,
really a pleasure to be here.
Yes. Okay. And you can catch Sally. Where else are you Halloween podcasting this year, Sally?
So I was just previously on X. I was also on This Endorian Life. And then here. So yeah.
That's 3.
Yeah.
That's 3 plus. Plus, this is my annual reminder that if you go directly to our SoundCloud page, soundcloud.com/allthebooks, we have a playlist with all of the Halloween episodes we've done in the history of the All the Book Show and House Things. So it's a pretty chunky playlist at this point, but you can revisit some of the old classics, and you can find them on YouTube as well. All right. Well, that's going to do it for this spooky episode of House Things. Sally, I'm sure I'll see you before then, but, if not, see you next Halloween.
All right. Peace.